Hey guys, I'm going to go over lesson 28's homework. And this one is about line plot, so it's going to take a minute to draw this. So let's read the directions. It says, a group of students measured the lengths of their shoes. The measurements are shown in the table. Make a line plot to display the data. So it's kind of hard to draw a straight line on here, so I'm going to pull over just one of the pictures they have on here to make a straight line. So draw as straight of a line as you can on your paper. And remember, a line plot isn't exactly like a number line. You do number it like a number line, but we put the X's above the number line. So let me show you that. We're going to put two tick marks, one at the end and one at the beginning. And in order to decide where to start and end our line plot, we need to look at the length of all the shoes. Well, if I look over here, I don't see any that are bigger or smaller than 7 inches, and I don't see any that are bigger than 9. They all seem to be either 7 or 8 inches, somewhere in between there. So I'm going to start it at 7 and I'm going to end it at 9. And then I'm going to put my 8 in the middle. And I can't just leave it at that because that's not enough places on the number line to plot our data. So I'm going to put my 8 here, and it looks like if you look at the denominators of all of our lengths of the shoes in the table, they're either halves or fourths. So I'm going to split each whole, so between 7 and 8, between 8 and 9, into halves and into fourths. So we're going to start off doing that. So I'm going to split it in half here and here, and then I'm going to split each half in half to get my fourths, just like that. Okay, now I'm going to start plotting each one. So start with Colin. His shoes were 8.5 inches long, so I'm going to find 8.5, which would be halfway between 8 and 9, or 2/4 in, so I'm going to put an X there. Dickon had shoes that were 7 3/4 inch long, so I'm going to look at 7 and I'm going to count up 3/4. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put an X there. Ben had shoes that were 7.5 inches long, so he's going to go right between 7 and 8 right there. Martha had shoes that were 7 3/4 inches, so it's going to go, now that's the second one, and if you have more than one that go in the same spot, you just put it on top like that. Lilius had shoes that were exactly 8 inches long, so it goes on the 8. Susan had 8.5, so another one that goes above that. Francis had shoes that were 7 3/4, so I'm going to put another there. And Mary had shoes that were 8 3/4 inches, so that's going to go right there in front of the 9. Okay, on this next part, we're going to use what we made on our line plot to answer some questions. So it's going to be kind of annoying because I got to go back and forth between the pages, but we're going to manage. So let's start off with number 2. If I can ever get down there, it says, solve each problem. Who has a shoe length 1 inch longer than Dickens? Well, let's go back up and look at Dickens. Dickens had a shoe length of 7 3/4. So what's exactly 1 inch longer than 7 3/4? That would be 8 3/4. And the only person that has that is Mary, because she's the only one down here that has a shoe length of 8 3/4. So Mary is going to be our answer for this first one. Now I can show you that too. Dickon was 7 3/4. So I'm going to write 7 3/4 out here. And 1 inch longer, if I added 1, is going to give you 8 3/4. And the only one that matches that is Mary. Okay, the next one says, who has a shoe length 1 inch shorter than Susan's? Well, Susan had 8.5, and if you subtract an inch, you're just going to get 7.5. So the only person with 7.5 is Ben, so he's going to be our answer. Okay, if we go back to, or if we go to the next problem, we're going to have to flip back and forth. 1 second. Okay, part C says how many 1/4 inches long is Martha's shoe length? So first let's go back and look at the table and figure out what Martha's shoe length is. And when we go back to the table to look, if I can ever turn this page, here we go. Martha's shoe length is 7 3/4 inches. And the question asks who has how many 1/4 inches, is Martha's shoe length. So if it's 7 3/4, let's go back and write that. If it's 7 3/4, Hold up. If it'll let me write this. Okay, 7 3/4, and we want to know how many quarter inches that is. Well, we know that the 3/4 is 3/4 because a fourth is a quarter. But we have 7 whole inches, so each one of those is 4/4 because it's a whole. And 4/4 times 7 would give us 28/4. So the 7 inches by itself is already 28 quarters. And then we got to add the 3/4 that we also have. So altogether her shoe length is 31/4 of an inch. Or 31/4. Remember, a quarter is a fourth. So it's 31/4. Quarter inches. Alright, part D says, what is the difference in inches between Lila's and Martha's shoe lengths? Well, let's go back and look at Lila's shoe length. If it'll ever let me turn this page. Nope. 1 second. Okay. Lila's shoe length is 8 inches exactly. And Martha's is 7 3/4. So if I go back to the other page and I need to find the difference, I'm going to say 8. Lila's is 8. Martha's is 7 3/4. And if I subtract those two, 8 minus 7 3/4 is just going to give you 1/4 of an inch. Remember, we learned how to do that last week. Okay, E says compare the shoe length of Ben and Francis using greater than, less than, or equal to. Well, let's go back and let's look at Ben and Francis and see what their shoe lengths are. Ben is 7 1/2 and Francis is 7 3/4 or 3/4. So if we wanted to compare those, it'll let me turn the page. Okay, we're going to have 7 1/2 which is Ben, and Francis is 7 3/4 or 3/4, and we know that 3/4 is going to be bigger than 1/2, so 7 1/2 is less than 7 3/4 would be our comparison statement for that one. Alright, F says how many students' shoes measured less than 8 inches. So let's go back and let's count all the people that have shoes that are less than 8 inches. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 out of them had shoes that measure less than 8 inches. So I'm going to put 4 students. And I just counted that using the table. And the next one says how many students measured the length of their shoes. Well, how many students participated total? So let me go back and count again. So it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 who measured their shoes total. So I'm going to put 8 students. So 8 students. Alright, H says Mr. Jones' shoe length was 25 1/2 inches. Using greater than, less than, or equal to, compare the length of Mr. Jones' shoe to the length of the longest student's shoe. Who had the longer shoe? So we got to compare this 25 1/2 inches. Well, first let's turn 25 1/2 inches or 25 1/2 inches into a mixed number. Well, if I pulled out 24 halves, which would give me a whole number, I could pull out this half. And 24 halves is the same thing as 12. So really Mr. Jones' shoe was 12 1/2 inches. So let's compare it to who had the longest shoe. The longest shoe was Mary, who was 8 3/4 inches. And when I go back and compare the two, 12 1/2 is obviously going to be a lot bigger than 8 3/4. So 12 1/2 is going to be greater than 8 3/4. So Mr. Jones had the bigger shoe and Mary had the smaller shoe. Okay, and the last question says, using the information in the table and on the line plot, write a question you could solve by using the number line. So I'm just going to come up with one. I'm going to say compare Okay, well, let me look back and see what their names were. I forgot their names. Compare the length of, let's pick 2 students to compare the length of their shoes. Let's do Colin. So we're going to say compare the length of Colin and Ben's shoes. Let's do that. And Ben's shoes using greater than, less than, or equal to. Or less than, greater than, or equal to. Either way. All right. Let me know if you have any questions.